And welcome back to The Street here on BNN Bloomberg. Thanks for being here with us. Businesses around Canada are tasked with ensuring that employees don't reach burnout amid the pandemic and the ongoing pandemic conditions. What role will corporate governance play in reshaping the way employees work and how involved they should be? We're joined now by an expert in corporate governance. He's Richard Leblanc, Professor of Governance Law and Ethics at York University in Toronto, to talk about it. Richard, thank you very much for joining us. The pandemic has turned a lot of things upside down in Canada over the long period of time now that we've endured these conditions, and it doesn't look like it's getting better anytime soon. What about in the boardroom? What about corporate ethics? What stock of corporate boards taken of all this and perhaps rethinking their processes?
Well, 2021, Paul, has been termed the year of the stakeholder, and institutional investors want to see the entire value chain, and that's caused a focus on ESG. And the most important part of S is employees. And prior to the pandemic, it used to be that the CEO was the board's employee. But now, because of working from home, we know, for example, that fatigue, exhaustion, stress, isolation, loneliness, substance abuse, even radicalization are going up in a work from home environment. So boards are asking senior management, how are our employees holding out? And show us some data that confirms that. So good boards now are asking for exit surveys. They're asking for culture surveys, engagement, science updates, regular outreach to employees, both phone calls and emails to make sure that everybody's content. And any issues can be dealt with, and that never used to be the case. Normally, the board would not be asking for that data and not have that line of sight.
That's interesting. Have you ever seen this before? You say that used to not be the case. We certainly have not seen a pandemic like this before. Have you ever seen a pivot towards employee wellness on the part of major Canadian boards before?
No, and it started in Europe, and Mr. O'Toole, as part of his election platform, said he wanted to put employees on board. So this is happening. We've also had a legal change in Canada recently, Paul, that corporate boards have an affirmative obligation to consider the interests of employees, including employee wellness, in its decision making. So this influence by institutional investors and legal requirements have really caused boards to ask, I think, very good questions. And that includes, health, safety, contentment, retention. And these questions are being asked, and I think they need to be asked.
Retention is interesting. We hear a lot about employees deciding they don't want to work for their employer anymore and moving on. We hear a lot on the other side of the coin where companies are finding it more difficult to retain or to attract new employees. That traditionally sounds like a management responsibility. Is it becoming more of a concern for boards as well?
Yeah, and it reaches right into the senior management ranks, Paul. I mean, with Omicron now, you could have a broad swath of senior leadership that could go down, either illness or otherwise, a broad swath of employees. So this is a significant risk for boards, and boards have a responsibility to oversee material risks. So it used to be, as to follow up what I said before, it's succession of the CEO. And now it's succession and retention of senior management, of key positions, of employee groups, particularly those that are customer facing. So boards are exercising appropriately their duty of care under the circumstances.
Let's tackle another dimension of the work from home phenomena. You've talked about what it can do to the well-being of employees. What about cybersecurity concerns as more and more companies for a longer and longer period of time have their employees connecting remotely from their homes, and indeed while boards themselves conduct meetings and business remotely?
Yeah, and that introduces opportunities for threat actors, including state-sponsored ones, because typically a work-from-home environment, you've got a little more relaxed or even a lot more internal controls over networks, encryption, passwords, etc., the use of family members' devices. It can get very sloppy very quickly. So going into year 3, boards want to know, and there are boards that have governed from home for the last 2 years and have never met colleagues or even have hired CEOs. So work from home should have the same internal controls over data integrity as working from the office, including the use of passwords and emails. Like directors, for example, should not be using Hotmail or Gmail or Rogers. A lot of cyber security ransomware comes from human error, and especially with boards at the senior most level to access proprietary company data. All steps should be taken that are reasonable in a home environment.
Interesting. And you mentioned at the top of our conversation as well, ESG, environmental, social, and governance concerns. Now, I think it's fair to say that before the pandemic gripped us all, those were pretty high, those had become pretty senior priorities for many boards of directors around the Western world. Has the pandemic changed the focus on ESG at all?
Yeah, what the pandemic has done is it's hit home that ESG can hurt you. And institutional shareholders have been traditionally focused on financial performance. But now they want to see the entire value chain, including customers, employees, the environment, communities. And good boards now are asking senior management, well, if investors are putting the heat on us, we need to put the heat on you. So we want to see all the KPIs and what we're measuring. And we even have auditors getting into this space of ESG now, Paul. PwC hired 100,000 employees to focus on ESG auditing. So this is rapidly maturing in 2022, and it's probably, next to employee wellness, it's probably the #2 concern of boards of directors is ESG.
Okay, lots there for investors to think about. If an investor is interested or concerned about what a board of directors of a company in which he or she owns stock is doing on several of these fronts, so where do they find that information? Documents released at the time of the annual general meeting?
Exactly, and now they're asking for more. They're even asking for racial audits, pay equity, fair treatment of employees. They want to see transparency. So companies are arguing, Paul, that this is proprietary information. It's not. You know, how you treat your customers, your employees, the environment, communities, that's all. There are best practices there, and it's generic. So investors are putting major heat on companies and boards for full, true, and plain disclosure of all ESG issues, and that's going to be a focus in 2022.